Good afternoon, everybody. This is my thesis defense topic, System Integration and Performance Evaluation of the WinC2R platform for 802.11 protocol. The outline of my talk would be like this. I will first go ahead with the introduction where I give a brief overview of the different kind of cognitive radio testbeds in use. Then I will go ahead with the WinC2R overview, followed by the research motivations and key objectives of my thesis. Then I'll go into a little bit detail of the WinC2R revision 2 architecture, followed by its performance evaluation and concluding with the conclusion literature. Cognitive radio is an intelligent transceiver which is able to support multiple technologies at the same time. The main characteristics are spectrum sensing, flexibility, and high speed. Currently, there are 4 types of cognitive radio platforms, and they can be classified into multimodal hardware platforms, portable software platforms, reconfigurable hardware-based platforms, and system-on-chip programmable platforms. In multimodal hardware platforms, the modules that perform the functions of a radio are generated in RTL, and they are fixed for a particular type of technology. If one wants to change the technology, one would have to change the module itself. As a result, this particular platform is not flexible and hence even not scalable. Coming to portable software platform, the modules over here are written in higher programming languages such as C++ or Java. Hence, this platform has higher flexibility and scalability as well. The performance of this platform depends on the general purpose processor which is in use and also the underlying operating system. An example of this is the GNU radio. It is also seen that this kind of platform has a disadvantage because it has a higher latency. The reconfigurable platform, the modules are implemented on an FPGA, or there is a tight coupling between the FPGA and the DSP processor. If one wants to change the technology, one would have to load another bit image onto the FPGA. Hence, we have limited flexibility in this platform. Example of this is the WARD platform, which is designed by the Rice University. And finally, we have the system-on-chip programmable platform, where over here the functions are an array of special purpose processors and hardware accelerators. We achieve high performance and high flexibility in this platform, but with the trade-off of it being more complex and at a higher cost. An example of this is the Pico chip device switches. I give a brief overview of what the WinC2R platform is all about. It is based on the concept of virtual flow pipeline. The key features of the WinC2R platform is its programmability and reconfigurability. Here the radio functions are implemented as hardware accelerators, or they can be even software modules. The flow provisioning is done in software, whereas the runtime control is done in hardware. It also supports interoperability because it is able to shift between different protocols quickly. And also, the platform is scalable because even though you add additional data processing modules, there is no need to change the existing architecture or the basic program itself. This is the concept of virtual flow pipeline on which the WinC2R is based. I will first explain what a fixed hardware pipeline is. In a fixed hardware pipeline, the sequence of operation is fixed. As you can see, in the frame period defined, the sequence of operation is from 1 to 2 to 3. As a result, we always get a fixed end-to-end latency in this pipeline. Also, there is no provisioning for multiplexing of the functional units between different flows. Coming to the virtual flow pipeline, over here, as you can see, the sequence of operation of frame period 1 is completely different from the sequence of operation in frame period 2. As a result, we also obtain a different end-to-end latency. Secondly, in frame period 2, we can also integrate the software modules in the flow. Also, as you can see, functional unit 4 has been used in both the frame periods but at different time instances, which shows that you can multiplex functional units between the different flows. These are the two WinC2R architectures. The first architecture, which is the revision 1 architecture, is a simple architecture which was implemented on an FPGA to prove the concept of virtual flow pipeline. Over here we have a simple system on chip interconnect, which is the IBM PLB bus, and the different functional units are connected to the bus. As we can see, each functional unit has a dedicated VFP controller. Coming to revision 2 architecture, it is a more advanced architecture when compared to revision 1. Over here, we have a cluster-based SOC architecture and a hierarchical bus architecture. The system interconnect that we use in this, it has a much higher bandwidth when compared to the PLB bus. We are using the AXI bus. As you can see, the main system bus is the main bus is the AXI bus on which the different clusters are connected, and within every cluster you have another AXI bus where the different functional units are connected. The VFP controller is common to a single cluster. Hence, this particular VFP controller services all the functional units which are present. So this architecture is a distributed architecture, whereas over here it is a shared architecture. There were some shortcomings in revision 1 which we realized and which led us to get a new architecture. The first one being that the VFP controller, because it was dedicated in every functional unit, it was underutilized to a certain extent. It was seen that the VFP controller remained idle for 70% of the time, which would mean that it would result in a higher hardware cost as well as power cost. Also, because of distributed VFP controllers, they would have to make frequent access onto the system bus, which would lead to degradation in the system latency. The second bottleneck was created by the system bus. The IBM PLB standard, IBM standard PLB bus, which we used in the revision 1, it is not meant for a large number of masters, and it is not a high bandwidth bus. Also, the protocol has its own limitation where one can transfer only a maximum of 64 bytes of data in one burst. Because of this limitation, every master generating high amount of data would have to request the bus multiple times in order to transfer the entire data. Having said this, I will now go ahead with what the research motivations and key objectives of my thesis are. The first one is building the virtual platform, which is based on the revision 2 architecture, which supports system performance evaluation, analysis of the available time budget per processing engine and software functions, and also to find out the hardware and software co-design and performance complexity. Second is to build an 802.11a light transmitter flow. This required introducing virtual processing engines that are written in higher programming languages, with each having a realistic processing delay. Also setting up the transmitter command flow in a way that we achieve the required throughput. And finally, evaluating the performance of the new architecture in terms of latency and throughput. I'll now go into the detail of the WinC2R architecture. This is the revision 1 architecture, where you see that in one functional unit we have the processing engine, which performs the task of the actual radio functions such as modulation or scrambling. It is interfaced with the local memory, that is, it reads the data which needs to be processed from the local memory and writes the processed data back into the memory. We have a DMA engine which is used for transferring the data from one functional unit to another over the system interconnect. And then finally we have a dedicated VFP controller in every FU. On comparing this with the new revision architecture, we see that the PE, the local memory, and the DMA is similar to what we had in the previous one. But the VFP controller is now shared between different FUs which are present in a particular cluster. Also, certain functions of the VFP controller have been made local to a functional unit, and that is why we have introduced a new block which performs the local tasks of the VFP controller. This is how the WinC2R transmitter looks like. All the functions, all the units that are required to build an 802.11a transmitter that are placed in a single cluster. All the functional units are connected over the AXI bus, and a single VFP controller caters to all the functional units. As you can see, the functional units that are in green are hardware engines, which have been taken from the previous implementation. The functions which are in blue are software modules, and they have been introduced new in this revision. This is the hierarchy of the system that we have, hierarchy of the platform which we have right now. Our platform is a mixed language platform where it can support all the 4 RTL languages, that is Verilog, System Verilog, and VHDL. As well as it can support the common software languages such as C and C++. Hence, this platform has become a very powerful platform because it can cater to most of the common programming languages. The revision 1 processing engines were in VHDL, and the revision 2 processing engines which are newly introduced are in C or C++. The way we integrated the C functions in the platform was by using the concept of direct programming interface by System Verilog. System Verilog right now supports only C and C as its foreign programming languages. The way the interface is done is by calling functions. So imported functions is a function in which the function itself is written in C or C++, and the System Verilog interface calls the functions from C. Exported functions are those in which the function itself is written in System Verilog, and the C function, the C program calls the System Verilog. In our implementation, we have mainly used imported functions. So our modules are generated in C, and the System Verilog just calls those particular functions. These are the new processing engines that we have introduced in this revision. We have the scrambler, encoder, and the interleaver. The scrambler is a C++ based function which was taken from GNU Radio. It is a frame synchronous scrambler with 802.118 protocol specified generator polynomial. The encoder is a convolutional encoder of rate half and constraint length 7. It also uses the industry standard generator polynomial. The encoder that we have does not contain a punctuator, which is why we cannot obtain high data rates in this implementation. Excuse me. The maximum that we can obtain is only 24 Mbps. And finally, we have the interleaver, which is a C function block interleaver, which supports both WiMAX as well as Wi-Fi standards. Before we go ahead with the actual performance analysis, we need to know the different kind of tasks the WinC2R platform supports. So there are 2 tasks, that is the asynchronous task and the synchronous task. Asynchronous tasks are demand tasks, and the VFP controller immediately schedules the task as soon as it receives it. Whereas the synchronous tasks have pre-allocated time slots, and the VFP controller will schedule those tasks only when their particular start time arrives. Synchronous tasks have an option of chunking, where a large frame is broken up into a smaller number of chunks, and the size of each chunk is predefined. Because of this chunking operation, we can reduce the overall end-to-end latency of the system, and it also provides service fairness when large frames are being transmitted or small frames are being transmitted. Both the synchronous and the asynchronous tasks have an option of dechunking. When I say dechunking, it means that the particular task has to wait for all the chunks to arrive, reform the frame again, and then work on the entire frame. The chunks are spaced apart by a period which is called the rescheduling period. As shown in this diagram, this line indicates the start time when the VFP controller initiates the chunk 1, and this is the time when the VFP controller initiates chunk 2. So the difference between these 2 start times is the rescheduling period, which is again predefined in the global data structures that we have. An optimal rescheduling period is defined in a way it meets the throughput requirement of the system.
So perhaps you can help me understand this a little bit better. What are these chunks?
Okay, so
We have some pictures.
yeah. So if you see over here, we have an entire frame, and when I say chunks, it is this entire frame is broken up into smaller chunks.
Why is it broken up?
It is broken up because it helps in reducing the end-to-end latency of the system. So if you consider that there is a large frame and we are not chunking, then this large frame will block the pipeline. It will stall the pipeline of the system. But when you actually chunk it, then the large frame or the small frame can all be considered as the
You
same.
will stall the pipeline because you have to wait until the
You have to wait
frame
until
is
the whole
received.
frame is
So
is
you
passed
split
out.
it into smaller
You
chunks so you
split
can
it in.
start processing.
Yes.
So the chunks will be what HDR? What does that stand for?
That is a
Header.
functional unit that we call header. Yes.
And what are the others?
This is a scrambler, encoder, interleaver, modulator, and IO.
Also, these are not the chunks. These are the
No, these are the
steps
processing
in the
engines.
pipeline.
The chunks are these, which are shown by 1, 2, 3.
These are the lifetime of the chunks. So essentially what happens is that the last stage in the pipeline will get engaged after with the first chunk, rather than waiting for the end of the frame. This is how you improve the
Yes,
latency.
so how does this relate with the architecture that you were showing previously of multiple nodes connected by a bus?
Yeah. So. So what happens is the MAC, it transfers the entire frame to the header as it is, the whole frame. The header does the task of breaking up the frame into smaller chunks. Once the header breaks up the frame into smaller chunks, the successive functional units, they are just going to pass the chunks. I mean, they're just going to operate on one small chunk and pass it ahead.
So is this bus connecting multiple FPGAs on your board?
No,
or is
it's not an FPGA implementation right now. It's just that the system bus connects all these different functional units. If we ever want to implement this, everything will be should be on a single chip.
So
Well, you have
yes,
something
no.
implemented, right? What?
The first version of the PLA bus. So this AXI bus is on-chip bus, but everything that is exchanged between these engines are actually messages. So we can, if you want to go multi-chip, you can send the messages across the chip interface, like PCI Express or something. Only the interface will change.
The original one was implemented on FPG. This version takes software.
Let's see. And this new bus replaces this previous IBM bus that
Yes,
you were showing earlier?
yes.
What exactly does the VFP controller do now?
The VFP controller is caters to like scheduling a particular task into each functional unit. Then it also has the knowledge of which
Scheduling a particular.
it's like initiating a particular task.
Okay, so a frame comes in, I guess the first chunk gets split off.
Yeah. So
Then
so in
that
case
chunk
of
is sent to the Mac, right?
yes. So in case of the Mac, the Mac gets the entire frame. The Mac gets the entire frame. The VFP controller, it's a command which tells the Mac to start processing, to start doing its operation on the entire frame. That is one of the tasks of the VFP controller. The second task of the VFP controller is that it should. This is going to be a virtual flow
The
pipe.
Mac is not constantly listening to the bus and start processing whenever it sees some message directed to it.
Yes, that is how it is going to be.
And I'm not sure why you need the controller yet. So if a new
When
frame
you-
arrives on the bus,
When you say bus, you mean the main bus?
this AXI bus that you have.
No, so the Mac will come to know when it is supposed to start working only when it gets a message from the VFP controller. The VFP controller has dedicated lines going to every functional unit.
His question is, listen to his question. His question is, could you make this work without a controller? And what does the controller enable?
The controller is the one which is enabling, is building up the entire virtual flow.
You can you go back to your picture which shows the hardware pipeline and the VLP pipeline.
He's asking, could you make this work without a controller? You could do a hardware pipeline. Why not? Why do you go there instead of just doing hardware pipeline?
We go there because, like I said before, with the hardware pipeline, we cannot have multiplexing of different functional units. It's like there is a physical connection between the different functional units always.
So you have multiple instances of the same functional unit?
In case of
What do you mean by multiplexing multiple functional units?
like over here, the FU4 is used in this time instant in frame period 2, and some other time instant it can also be used in in frame period 1. That is what I mean by multiplexing.
There are two different flows, right?
Yes.
It enables multiple flows.
Yes, it enables multiple flows.
Two different frames.
Yes, there are two different frames.
So on the right-hand side, the connection there is a virtual connection. There's no physical connection. So the VFP controller handles the virtual connection. So he links FU3 to FU1, and once it's linked, you can break it down and reconnect to FU3 to FU4, for example. So that's the job of VFP controller, to link the FUs together.
So I guess your premise is that you have multiple different protocols running at the same time
Right.
on the same platform.
That's what you
And
started
some of
with.
the FUs might be shared among different
Yes.
flows, and some of them might be
Yes.
specific to a particular protocol.
Yes.
So it's a virtual connection.
Then you want to, the controller will dynamically schedule all of these.
Processing resource.
And there's no static schedule you can come up with.
If you want it to be defined for a particular protocol, then it should just be defined that way in the data structure that we have, and then it will be static.
You provision it anyway statically based on the requirements of your traffic. But at the runtime, you still have to chop these frames or packets and assign it to different processing engines. You still have to control the legal schedule up front.
Is any kind of buffering happening here?
It's actually not too much.
Too much.
So that's one of the things that we can reduce, but it requires much smarter memory control. Every
Functional unit?
every function unit has the input buffer and the output buffer.
So the local memory that I talk about, that consists of two buffers. One is the input buffer, and there is one more which is the output buffer.
And they all double buffers.
Yes.
I guess I'm still a little lost on why you need this dynamic controller telling it to start processing. I guess you have fixed pipelines upset, they are statically pre-configured. And then you have packets coming in, you split them into chunks. And each functional unit has a buffer, just processing one chunk after another from each buffer, from the buffer.
Like
And
a particular processing engine can do multiple things. Like for example, maybe an interleaver can do interleaving for WiMAX, it can do for Wi-Fi. But how will it know which one it is to do right now for this chunk? That will be told by the VFP controller that this chunk that is coming in right now is for Wi-Fi. The very next instance, it could be a WiMAX thing coming in, and all these are different frames multiplexed together. So it's not that one frame is going all past, then the Wi-Fi thing is coming, then the WiMAX. All these are running at the same time, maybe back-to-back
So
chunks.
I had implicitly assumed that you would somehow tag these chunks and say, so let's say this is a WiMAX chunk and this is some other protocol chunk.
Yeah, there is a
There's
control
reason why
parameter
you're not
that
doing
is.
that.
They're tagged.
Yeah, they are tagged in a way.
It has the control information.
Yeah, it has a control information which every every PE it decodes to understand which standard it is supposed to.
So then the functional unit just needs to look at the tag, right? It doesn't need to be told anything more.
You mean
Okay,
the
there is one more. Okay, this is one of the purposes of the controller. The other one is establishing the producer-consumer relationships. Now that is also not a static thing. Maybe sometime the header is going to feed the encoder. Maybe some protocol you have does not need an encoder. Maybe it goes directly to the whatever interleaver. This is just an example.
But
Okay.
it's static per protocol. Each-
Yeah, for per protocol it will be specified.
But
But in
we-
case you want to change it, there will be like it is a virtual
in-
link that is
In case you
there.
want to run a new protocol.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
yes.
Just something that has come up recently. You
Yeah.
want to
But
implement
then
that.
we probably need,
You just change the tables, the flow structures,
You
the data
just-
structures, and you have a new flow.
This is, I
to
mean,
do
when
an
you,
offline process.
right,
The reason it needs to be dynamic, just adding a new protocol to the machine.
So even if you forget about the complex scenario with multiple protocols and so on, even with the same protocol, everything you do at the physical layer, MAC layer, has a number of different variations. You have different modulation schemes, different lengths of the FFT and so on. So depending on where you are in the network and what are your communicating parameters, these parameters are changing. So it's correct, when you change it statically, then reprovision it and then have the task being observed by the engines. But then you would need that intelligence at every engine. So that it has
At least if it's a design decision, you can do it with jacking alone. But then
Is
he's
that
trying
much
to do
higher
a
performance
So
than
I
trying
think
to?
there's some benefit to this kind of external controller because it allows you not to listen to the channel for the next packet coming in a sort of synchronous versus asynchronous. So each module doesn't have to have a process that's continuously ready to receive. And we also avoid sort of collision events where you have to double buffer two things or three things if things are kept up certain perfect state. But it's a really design process. I don't think
Exactly,
it's
it's designed for that.
I think this allows for scalability. If you want to make a flexible and scalable architecture where you could add modules in the future or add them occasionally. Right now you want to have multiple FFTs.
I think what he's
Next.
saying still you can do it. It's just if you make things fast enough, you don't need the synchronous. You can just dump things in, but it comes at
You
some
can just
cost.
fix it here. The other thing is also you can, depending on the result of the processing, you can change your processing flow. If you have the error, for instance, you may decide not to go into the modulator at all. This is why we have the branching with this control scheme. So these are the things that you can do only at the runtime. Again, you can do it without it, but then you have to build in all these intelligence.
Yeah, branching you
inside.
can do through headers which have to be properly identified. But
Because you have intelligence there.
It's okay, you can design it one way or the other, but this one definitely avoids arbitrary buffering inside each module because you make it a deterministic schedule.
Okay.
Yeah, the rescheduling period is the difference in the start times of the two chunks, and we should set an optimal. We should set the rescheduling period in such a way that we meet the throughput requirement of the
So
system.
this one, can I ask, I mean, so how do you determine the chunk size and the rescheduling?
Yes. So. So the chunk size, we assume that every that one chunk consists of integer number of OFDM symbols. So based on that, we calculate the chunk size, which will be in number of bytes. That it will be the number of OFDM symbols that you want in one chunk into the number of data bits that are present in one OFDM symbol. This is how we come up with the chunk size.
No, this is the definition of chunk size, but how do you decide whether to put 500 bytes or 200 bytes of data?
Yeah, so we also in the later slides we have evaluated that whether the chunk size, if we keep the chunk size small or we keep the chunk size big, what would be the performance?
It's steady growth,
Yeah,
right?
there will be a performance
And
rate.
that's
So to address another point of Marco, go back to the comparisons of different, that table where you have 4 columns in the beginning.
Mhm.
Just make it quick. So what you're sort of saying is this multi-module hardware with very kind of flexibility in there. That's, I think, what you're suggesting. And then, like the GNU radio, well, not the GNU radio, the last one you haven't added, like a Pico chip
Pico
does
chip.
that. It's mostly programmable software. Like what this structure is doing is something in between the two, where you're trying to make it programmable while keeping mostly hardware. And you're trying to make it scalable, and you try to make it relatively flexible, and more flexible than like, okay, you know, if you wanted to add like a change in the standard, it would be hard, you know, if you had to redesign the hardware itself, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I still believe you could also do it without a VLP controller.
You could, but not.
It might be a lower complexity solution, but you might have issues such as process overflowing that you're avoiding by
There are some things you can do, there are some things you cannot. For instance, one thing that is common to all these architectures, there is no architecturally visible control scheme for scheduling processing resources. So architecturally visible means that basically through API you can invoke these schemes and you have particular guarantees. So multi-model, of course, there's not even sharing. On the SOC, it's done, but it's all done in the software. So it's not architecture visible, it's API visible through the software layers. And that software layer itself consumes the processing resources, the guarantees are kind of soft and so on.
But there is some risk with both. Like if you do scheduling, processing takes too long because you have 5 threads running or something, then your scheduler can fail. Roughly, that is what he is talking about, having just packets with self-identifying header that would fail in the software.
But so we have, that's why we have both synchronous and asynchronous scheduling schemes, because the synchronous one is very prone to the failures if you have failures. But it gives in the unloaded system, it gives you the hard guarantees.
Because anyway, it's their exam, not
Yeah.
yours, so let's go back.
It's a fundamental question which had to be addressed.
So when you calculate all these things, R and so on, do you have some kind of an offline tool to try to estimate this thing? How do you set the schedule?
The rescheduling period that you, yeah. So what we do is we just send a frame without by seeing how much time it takes from end to end to reach, and then depending on that, if it meets the throughput requirement or not, we set the rescheduling.
But what is the methodology for determining the time for each? Do you have like you do a simulation?
Yeah, we do it as a simulation, and we have 2 conditions that we need to satisfy. I'll be talking about that in the next slide, which on depending on that we set up our rescheduling period.
Okay, so before you set this up, then you have to simulate each module.
Yes,
and
yes.
write down the time involved.
Yeah, it is just in one module because this rescheduling period will come into picture only in the functional unit which does the task of chunking. Yeah, so only for that particular module we need to set it, and the rest of the things will just
Okay,
get
but
done.
you somehow have to choose this so that the pipeline flows.
Yes, yes,
So the worst case in the pipeline has to be factored in.
Yes, yes. Yeah, this is the concept of where I explain the concept of multiple flows. The platform is able to support multiple OMDM flows at the same time. So, as I explained before, we have the rescheduling period, which is the difference between the time when chunk 1 of flow 1 comes and chunk 2 of flow 1 comes. So, within this time, the header engine is idle. So, what the VFP controller does is it caters to another flow and it gives the header the chunk 1 of flow 2. So, this is how the 2 flows get multiplied. The functional units which are after the header, they just keep passing the chunks as they get it from the header and from the previous processing engine. So we see a perfect multiplexing of the chunks happening. Yeah. This is the IFFT structure that we have in our current implementation. The IFFT engine has two tasks. One is to generate the preamble, PLCP preamble, which is used in 802.118, and it also does the inverse Fourier transform of the data which it gets, which is reads from the memory. These two things, the MUX selects either the IFFT data or the preamble, and it routes it onto either of the four channels. Now each channel has a FIFO which is connected to it. These FIFOs are read at a constant rate, and if you have an actual system, the output of these FIFOs will be connected to a DAC and then to the RF side and so on. So to avoid corruption of data, we need to satisfy two conditions. One, that the FIFO should never overflow. That is, if the data chunks that are coming to the IFFT are too close to each other, then this FIFO becomes full even before the previous written data chunks were read out. Hence, it will cause an error condition. It will cause corruption of data. The second is that the FIFO should never become FTSL. That is, if the data chunks that are coming in are spaced too far apart, then it might happen that the chunk that is written in the FIFO is already read out, but no new chunk has arrived. So these are the two conditions which you need to avoid to attain successful transmission of data. The rescheduling period that I mentioned before takes care of this. So it should be set in such a way that your FIFO never becomes full and it never becomes empty. So there should be continuous flow of data coming into the IFFT engine. And because the chunking happens only at the header side, which is like the first or the second block in the pipeline, we set it over there. This is the WinC to our command flow of the transmitter. The first the first command is the send data frame command, which is written during the time of configuration into and the VFP controller then triggers this command in the MAC. The entire frame is transferred from MAC to header, and it is at the header, like I said before, the chunking takes place. The header then initiates two commands. One that goes to the scrambler and one that goes to the IFFT. The one going to the IFFT is the preamble start command. This tells the IFFT that it needs to start generating the preamble. And the one that goes to the scrambler just tells the scrambler that it needs to start scrambling the data that is going to come. So then the flow continues, like the scrambler triggers the encoder interleaver, and modulator, and so on. So this is the command here.
We should also mention that all these processing times can be either the real timing or back-analytic timing.
So
which makes your analysis very
the processing engines which are in green, they are hardware modules, so they have the actual time. Whereas the ones that are in blue, they are software, and the processing times that we have included for this is by back-ended calculation of what an actual scrambler or an encoder might take. We have then inserted that processing delay in these engines.
So the software is running on just single thread on
Yes,
a simple.
it's just a simple.
Simple machine.
Yes.
So what is your these things that you're going to describe? What was the particular microprocessor you used for its reduced kind of simplest processor?
Yes. We got the numbers from what if those if these particular modules were to be generated in hardware, how much the processing time or the latency would be, and then that we have incorporated into the software.
So do you have some tools where you can accurately calculate that?
No, actually no. We got the numbers from the industry. Professors were
Okay, which number you got from
the amount of time a scrambler or an encoder would actually take if it was to be generated.
You have the PEs here.
Yes.
That is part of your library, right? Someone PE was given to you.
It wasn't.
You are building your own PE.
But these blue bees are actually C.
But C running on something.
Running in the same simulation environment like everything else. So for the simulator, it looks the same as if it is a hardware engine.
But she doesn't have realistic delays, so she got delays from
There's some instantiation which you're running in hardware. This is all it's in the FPGA.
No,
it's
this is
in
not
the-
on the FPGA.
In a simulation, but it's actual RTL design.
But eventually we have to have something running on the FPGA.
On the FPGA,
itself,
yeah.
right? There's some code that you will need.
All of this we can retarget to the FPGA. If it's interested now, everything is going to the FPGA except this boost engine. And now this boost engine, since we don't have VHDL or Verilog, we can either design them, buy them. Some of these are available from Xilinx libraries, but they get to pay for it.
Okay, so the library would
Yeah.
give you.
Library will give it, yeah.
So I thought that the library would also come with
With the C.
benchmarking that allows you.
It will, yeah. But once we have it, it's
What
don't
kind
have
of processor is that? Some stripped down micro or what is it that would be done?
No, this is not actually not a processor. It's more running in a simulation.
Yeah.
So it's
Now
just a
it's
C code.
running
Yeah,
in
so it's all in a simulation. So,
Eventually.
eventually, there should be a hardware because we are assuming this is the hardware engine. Now, some of these engines, like the Interlever, they have architecture implemented in a Tensilica processor, which can also be retargeted in FPGA and RTL.
How many gates? Can this?
So the stripped down processor for Interlever is 80,000 units. Yes. In 65 nanometer it is 65,000 units.
I think this is a bit confusing to say that this is in software. This is as part of your methodology, it's in software, but
Yeah.
if it's really a hardware module.
Yeah, eventually it will be a-
For the analysis, it's a hardware module.
The performance analysis is is taken on two bases. One is latency. So latency is the time required for the first data byte to travel across the file layer engines, that is starting from the header ending at the IF50. The latency is made up of three components. First is the processing engine time, which is the time required for every processing engine to operate on one data chunk. Then is the VFP processing time, which is the time taken by the controller to initiate the task, then to identify which is the next functional unit in the flow, and then to initiate the task in that identified unit. And then finally is the DMA transfer time, which is the time taken to transfer the data from one function unit to another over the system interconnect. Second performance analysis was done on throughput. So the throughput requirement of the system is, okay, like I explained before, we have the 4 FIFOs at the IF50. Those FIFOs are being read at a constant rate. At the output of IF50, we get complex data bits. So when we read from the FIFOs, we should meet the throughput requirement. That is what it should be actually. But we have this particular formula where we see that the information data bits that we have, which is prior to the modulation, and divided by the required rate, should be equal to the complex data which we get from the IF50 divided by the reading rate of the FIFO. To satisfy this particular equation, we should first set the FIFO reading rate. Once we set the FIFO reading rate, we should then change the rescheduling period that I mentioned in a way that the FIFO does not become empty or it does not become full. Once we have, so in this way we can say that we meet the throughput requirement of the system. And we have always measured the throughput at the header where we do the chunking. Now come to the performance evaluation. These are the different 4 scenarios that we saw. First, we just did a basic experiment of just transmitting a single frame going end to end. Then was the effect of chunk size on the latency. Then we did a single flow scenario, calculated its latency and throughput, and then finally multiple flows. This is the basic experiment. The aim of this experiment was to just transmit a single frame of 64 bytes at a rate of 6 Mbps. This was our first step to validate the new architecture. The problem that we saw that was the FIFOs at the IF50 would always empty out. However small, we would keep the rescheduling period. We diagnosed the problem to be that the data chunks are not written into the cipher by the time the preamble is read out. And this is because in the new architecture we have the additional processing engines, the scrambler, interleaver, and the encoder, which were absent in the previous one. Which had so due to the addition of these processing engines, we have increased the latency overall, and that's the reason the FIFO would always empty out. The preamble start command, like I mentioned before, which tells the I50 to start the generation of preamble, was an asynchronous task in the previous implementation, which means that as soon as the task comes to the VFP controller, we'll schedule it immediately. So to solve this entire problem, what we decided to do was to change the preamble start command from an asynchronous to a synchronous command, to a synchronous task. By converting it to a synchronous task, now we specify the time when this particular task should be initiated. So we set the start time of this command in such a way that we are sure that we have some data chunks coming in already, and then we start the preamble so that the FIFO does not empty out. And this shift from going from asynchronous task to a synchronous task was very easily achievable. All we had to do was just change the data structures that we have, the entries in the data structure, and we just got it. Now we come to the second one, which is the effect of chunk size on the latency. Here we had to evaluate what the effect would be if we change the chunk size. And in this experiment, we transmitted 11 frames of each of size 400 bytes back to back at rates 6 and 12 Mbps. So the x-axis shows the number of OFDM symbols which are present in one chunk. So we see that when the number of OFDM symbols is 2 or 4, the latency is minimum. But when we increase the number of OFDM symbols to 8, we see a huge increase in the latency of the system.
Why is that?
That is because now the chunk size has increased. So every processing engine that we have in our flow takes more time to operate on that particular data. And especially when it comes to the modulator engine, the way we have implemented the modulator is that it maps 1 bit to 32 bit. So it needs to work that much more to handle one particular chunk, which is of a much bigger size, and hence we see a sharp increase.
So most of the delay is due to the
Is due
modulator.
to the modulator, yes.
So go back. Why is there this crossover between 6 megabit and 12 megabits? Why are the differences between these different bit rates?
Even though the bit rates are different, I mean, even if the number of symbols in one chunk is the same, but the chunk size inherently is different. So one OFDM, the number of bits that are present in one OFDM symbol is different for every data rate.
Okay, so how different is it?
So for 6 Mbps, if we have 4 OFDM symbols in one chunk, the number of bytes is 12, whereas for 12 Mbps, the number of bytes is double, it's 24.
So which of your processing stages does it get affected by that?
All the processing stage, from the time it starts chunking, right after the header. Every processing engine will take more time because it has to work on the bigger.
Because the more bits in there, the 12 megabit processing, 12 megabits takes longer.
Yes.
Your graph shows it's actually quicker.
In the case of 8 OFDM symbols.
So that depends where the bottleneck is. If the bottleneck is before the modulator, then you're going to have a dominant blue line. If the bottleneck is at the modulator or later, you're going to have reverse.
Before the modulator, why would you?
Because that's where for more higher rate, you have bigger chunks.
You have more bits in each chunk.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
so that's why,
before the demodulator chunks are the same.
no,
No,
no.
no.
The chunks are relative to the size of the ORDM symbols, right? So if you increase the rate, then more bits map into an RDM symbol. Right? So in terms of bits, the chunks are bigger. In terms of
The number of
modulator and FFT, the chunks are same. I think that's why she has a cursor.
And this you would generally expect to see 12 megabit always being higher. I don't see the intuition for it to be lower. I think also the sharp increases would be puzzling here. But that could be somewhat explained by the trade-off between chunk size and processing.
How often do you measure this?
How often? I'm passing the 11 frames back to back. So I measure the latency from the start of at the start of the first chunk at the header and the first chunk being written out into the IF.
1 point here shows the average.
Yes, it is an average over the 11 frames. Yes.
11 doesn't sound like a whole lot.
Because okay.
Given that takes hours.
Yeah, it used to take a lot of time. It takes almost like 2 hours and just
It's
for
not your
system.
2 hours, it's 7 hours of a machine.
Pardon?
It's not your 2 hours, it's,
Yeah.
it's free labor. Just make somebody else do it.
So what's causing the sharp increase in latency is probably that your FFT processing is going up non-linearly with the size of the chunk. If the processing goes linearly with the size of chunk, then it should
Yes.
be the same.
Yes.
Okay, so that what size FFTs were you using?
In this, we using the 64. Yeah, 64 point.
For both examples?
Yes, yes. We the FFT that we have, it just works for 64. It's implemented only as a 64. It is a Xilinx core that we have.
Okay, but if you go in with 2 symbols, what does that mean? Do you have a lot of wastage in the FFT or do you do a smaller FFT?
Wait, I did
Because
not.
when you do an FFT computation, you have some number of input time samples.
Mhm.
You get out the frequency.
Yes.
But if you have too few time samples, the rest is zero padding or something.
Uh-huh.
So in that case, you're throwing away processing cycles.
Mhm.
In the case where you fill exactly 64, you get kind of more efficient use of that.
We have more than the size of our data that comes at the FFT is bigger than 64.
Yeah, because
No,
it's
but eventually, when you do one chunk, that chunk is going through the modulator and FFT.
Yeah, when the chunk reaches the FFT, it is bigger than.
It is
64.
bigger than 64. Because the
Because the modulator is
modulation
going to blow it up like hell. Like if one bit is going to be replaced by 16 bits or
32 bits.
it becomes 16 times more.
Yeah, but for everything there's a size. If you start with this number of OFDM symbols, that gets thrown up into the full modulation value. But it's still a small amount if you're going in with OFDM symbols versus 8 is a lot more.
Okay, but if in both cases it is still bigger than 64, then the impact should not be very different.
Yeah, but in one case I think it should be a bit less than 64. I am not sure. At 8 it's probably bigger.
Actually, outside the modulator, the chunk size does not matter. Once it's out of the modulator, the chunk size for 6 Mbps and 12 Mbps generate the same amount of bits.
Same.
Because the number of data bits are more in your 12 Mbps, but number of complex bits is same as what it would have been for 6 Mbps. So that's why it does not make a difference whether it is 12 or 6 when it comes to the IFFT.
it's a multiple symbol, so it has all the carriers.
Right, so that's why,
Then you have the explanation for that.
so those 2 points I think are error in
So that small error is okay, but then this sharp rise from 4 to 8 is sort of.
There are more reasons for that. Back pressure builds up with the buffering in the pipeline, and that starts
But if
pushing up the
you're
values.
doing synchronous with proper estimation, there's no backtrack.
Actually, that is one of the issues that is there.
Not all agents are synchronous, only the first one.
They transfer.
There are many
There's
things
a large
to
chunk
do
of more
scheduling.
transfer.
But it's described as a synchronous perfect pipeline.
It's synchronous to satisfy the protocol requirements. So, and it's enough if you have the first one and last one.
But you're saying in between there could be something.
In the multiple flows there is.
In the later drafts, you
Okay,
see
we
that
can come
there's-
back to that, let's see.
in the single flow scenario, we are just passing. We are supporting just one OFDM flow. As I mentioned again, we are passing 11 frames back to back of each of size 400, and we did it for all 6, 12, and 24 Mbps frames. This is the graph that we got over 11 frames for 6, 12. This is for 6, 12, and 24. We see that when it is frame number 1, the latency is a bit lower as
So this
compared
is
to
the
the
total
others.
through the entire pipeline, how do you measure? this?
Yeah, it is starting the first data chunk at the header to the first data chunk being written into the file at the
And
end.
how many stages did it go through?
It goes through 6 stages. 7. This thing math is. So yeah, the frame number 1, we see that the latency is little lesser when compared to the other frames. That's because this is the very first frame, and all the processing engines that you have, they are free and they are sitting idle.
So this doesn't look like you have any queuing. It looks like it's just going through.
Over here,
No,
Yeah.
The jump that you see in the latency from the very first
from
point to the
first to the
second.
second, it
That's
is.
expected, but
Yes.
I'm saying that if you have back pressure effects, then.
You will see that in the
Well,
multiple
Multiple
flows.
flows
Yeah,
will
that
have
will
back
come in the
pressure.
multiple. And
No, but even there it doesn't accumulate. You just,
yeah, here it is not accumulating.
you're not even in the multiple flows.
Yeah.
Even in multiple flows, it doesn't accumulate. You
Yeah,
have a steady flow.
it should not
Yeah, I
accumulate.
mean, this one is clean that you can see that it has a certain amount of processing time across and the worst case dropping it, so whichever it is.
This is the peak throughput which we measured at the header. For 6 Mbps, we got 7.47. For 12, it was 16.25, and for 24, it was 34. If the effect of rescheduling period also has by changing the rescheduling period, it affects the peak throughput that we measure. So if we have a smaller rescheduling period, then in that amount of time, all the data chunks are being passed, so we get a higher throughput.
So I'm getting confused by what was your technology assumption here for this pipeline is running on what technology, what clock rate and so on?
Yeah, so we set the we assume that we want our system to run at 6 Mbps to give its throughput as 6
That's
Mbps.
the input.
Yeah.
100 megahertz.
So the clock is 100.
This was for 100.
Yeah, this was for 100.
So you would be running the FPGA at 100 megahertz to get this?
Yes, if you have to put it in. Right now it's only in simulation.
But how does the software part move into the FPGA? I mean, is this my longer question is, can you get 34 megabit on an FPGA in the lab if some additional work?
As of now, we will need those 3 processing engines in hardware as well, which we don't have right now.
So actually, if we run those functions on the stripped down processor, yes, we can do it. Like for example, the interleaver, you can have the 30 megahertz processor, stripped down processor, and you can get the required throughput of 54 Mbps.
So
At
why
30
didn't you
Mbps.
do that? Why did you move to this?
No, because
software
that work
model.
was done parallelly with this work. I am working on that aspect of the function engine design. But this
So
work
this was to test the logic and.
yeah, this
Yes.
was to set the time analysis and
To
budgeting
see
the
whether
time.
we can.
So you're saying
the
that this
requirement.
number is achievable with?
Yes.
Yes.
typical FPGA clock traits.
Yes, if we have, because on typical FPGA we have a microblaze processor, which is fine enough, like which can run
So
at
will
200.
this code port directly to microblaze without any further work?
Those functions can be
Those
projected on the
functions will be
microblaze.
on
Can be is not without further
So
work.
he's working on the interleaver. There are 3 blocks. He's working on the interleaver, and there are 2 other blocks which nobody's
Yeah,
working
but what is the work required to code that this simulation will?
FPGA coding is required, or you will use the IP code.
No, actually if we have those processors, then we just need to put, we just need to compile our code in the, for that processor specific compiler. And I guess the code size is around 2K instruction, 2K bytes. And if you put that in the memory, that processor should handle the.
That has been checked already, or you are?
I have checked it for my for interleaver work.
But probably the simple microprocessor may not be able to achieve that. No, what processor he uses is something that he has modified. It's applications. He has extra instructions that he has added to that and things like that. So it is a general purpose processor, but meant for interleaving. So there are 2 different types of. So it's somewhere between a hardware and a processor. So it is still more powerful, and that's why it can achieve those kind of rates. So a general purpose processor may not be able to achieve that much. So it's
So that's another thing. I mean, here we are also not even making a call whether these engines are hardware or software. They can all be hardware. And
So these functions you put in software, was there a particular reason to put those in software rather than?
so the name is actually mid-leading, as you said, the implementation is in the software. But actually the engines, we are just assuming that these engines are implemented in the hardware. And mechanically, the timing is from the hardware implementation, not the software
What
implementation.
sort of put you onto the software path, the methodology moved you?
For methodology, because we don't have these engines.
No, but why don't you just do it like interleaver is a typical hardware project? So why does that happen?
Maduro didn't have another 6 months.
Yeah, so it is easier.
I thought it would be easier to do interleaver in hardware than in software and then do these
Well,
roundabout.
in the software, she has it because Motic has done it. Since he is porting it on a custom processor, he just took his code.
Okay, so I think for these different talks, it would be sometimes helpful to have a flow chart of who did what to whom in this project to start, because it's very difficult to create individual contributions.
So under revision 1, which say Khan et al.
No, I mean more like, okay, there's this parallel effort doing this. If you can show the time flow, then it's easier to put the thing.
So she sort of put 2, like revision 1 and revision 2.
I think I understand that. It's not-
And the system Virl chart was supposed to show.
Then again, software would be the right way to do if you had an interesting function which is like security but if you had something like interleaving, that's a pretty typical hardware.
Yeah.
The name is wrong. We shouldn't call it software. Let's just call it dummy hardware module. Just doing.
Those functions are only in are in C or in software, but then the architecture around it and the time that it takes, it's not that it will give out the output in 0 time.
So-
No, but the
introduce it.
time it takes has to be associated with the realization of hardware.
Yes, so that time that
But
we
that assumption that you're making with some processor, I mean, he mentioned a particular
Well,
processor.
this is confusing. The time budget that she mentions here is based on the real hardware design
Yes.
for the interleaver.
For
and
the
all these
interleaver.
things. Now he has a separate project for doing it in a custom processor and trying to achieve a
So
similar
these numbers are based
on the hardware
It's
design.
all-
I
it's
thought
based
you
on
were
that.
writing those in C.
It's in a C, but it's
But that you're
continuous.
accepting somebody's mapping of C
Right.
to hardware.
I'm accepting somebody that's hardware design, which does the same thing as
So
this.
you're happy with the C to hardware mapping, or usually there's still a factor of two?
No, so it's not translating into hardware implementation. So there are some other industry groups that I just ask them, how long, what's your latency of your scramble? What's the latency of your encoder? Because it does the same thing. We just wanted to have the same type of processing in our flow so that we can test it end to end.
So that number is just plugged in?
Plug in.
Yes.
Paper.
Yes.
Like,
C is here only for achieving the functionality, not for the time. Because
I mean, framework that you use, the tool, System Verilog is industry standard for this type of
No, I
design.
realize so, but again, there are some people who work with very high level language description and then you can accept the hardware that comes out, but typically if you're designing a pipeline, you wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's not for ELA. It's just for the purpose of the end-to-end analysis to find out the budget.
We wanted to build an complete 802.118 flow, and to do that, and then the amount of time span that we had, we decided to take for our software.
So that's why she said at the beginning she's building the virtual platform, and it's actually a very useful thing to have, because now when we are experimenting, we can find out what is the budget for some engine. We can have it.
In the multiple flow scenario, we are setting up two OFDM flows where each flow is transmitting 11 frames. And we did that for 6, 12, and 24 Mbps. This is the command flow when it comes to multiple flow. The first command is written into the MAC for the first flow. The MAC then triggers the header. As soon as the MAC finishes operating on the frame which belongs to the first flow, we inject the second flow into the system. And then after that, from the header onwards, we obtain the multiplexing like in the diagram mentioned before. There is a limitation which is introduced because of the IFFT module that we have. Like I showed before, we have 4 FIFOs which are in one particular IFFT, which we could be dedicating each FIFO to one particular flow. This would mean that we could have achieved a maximum of 4 flows going at the same time. But we run into a problem where the preamble of the succeeding frame, which is belonging to one flow, that generation of that preamble might start before even the data chunks of the previous frame have gone through. This will cause an error. So what we do is we have a ping pong system of the FIFOs. That is, we dedicate 2 FIFOs to one particular flow. So like frame 1 goes on to FIFO 1, and the frame 2 belonging to the same flow goes on to FIFO 2. So because of this particular limitation that we have, right now the implementation supports only 2 OFDM flows at a time. This is the latency curves that we got for multiple flows. The red one is when we ran a single flow of 12 Mbps, whereas the upper two ones are when we ran 2 flows of 12 Mbps each. We see there's quite a big jump in the latency.
It makes sense to me, but what I still am a bit confused. So which part is actually simulation versus plugging in from a table or paper? So in this thing, how many? You had 6 stages.
Yes.
So stage 1, is it a
Stage.
full hardware simulation?
Yes. Yes.
Stage 2.
Stage 2
the
is
number
full.
being looked up.
Yes. Yes.
Then so you have 3 of them which are the hardware being simulated. The
Yes.
others are plugged in.
Yes.
Okay, but that might be kind of risky to do this kind of methodology.
But then the way we have plugged in the numbers is in terms of clock cycles, and the C engine that we have has a system Verilog wrapper which is around it, which will again be a clock-based system. So we just plug in the numbers in terms of clock cycles, and then that particular engine waits for that much time. So that's how we achieve.
Okay, but if it were your company's product, would that give you much confidence? It seems like a 2 levels of indirection. I'm not very confident, but okay. So, but the 3 of them you are running full.
Yes. Yes.
Sorry,
4.
4.
You have 7, right?
Yeah.
4
For the Mac header, modulator, and IFFT, they are in complete hardware.
Okay. Is there a plan to put them together in the near future with this kind of 2 flows running 24 minutes?
In FPGA.
What do we have to do to get there?
I think this provides a great framework right now.
It's a framework actually. This is the design flow that's ready both for FPGA and ASIC. So what we need is first, I'm not sure if AXI bus is retargetable for FPGA architecture.
It is going to say.
It should be.
Huh? It is.
Internal license, right? For that synthesis.
Yeah.
The license and all you need, but you are saying feasibility, right?
It should be.
Feasibility.
Yes.
Whether you can put it on the
It's very concerned that whether it will fit.
Yes.
So, but
which Xilinx versions?
Right now, we haven't targeted this to
Yeah.
Xilinx yet. First, we will need to have Xilinx components for this engine that are missing, like Scambler and so on, or design. Second thing is the AXI bus.
We just have a simulation model for
Yeah.
that right now. If you want to put it on the FPGA, you need to buy the whatever,
The
RTL or
synthesized.
the water synthesized thing for that. So that is to be bought, I guess. You have to purchase.
Yes.
For the IP ports.
Yeah,
For the-
you have to pay for that.
If you have to do everything in a card.
And all this will definitely not fit on one FPGA.
Yeah.
So it has to go from FPGA.
But I think for you to extend this messaging
It's not
FPGA
because
to
it's messaging based, so it's not that much of.
this should be done anyway so that it can scale across FPGA. If you don't want to be restricted like
How is this related to the demo that Khan produced, which was on the FPGA?
So it's we're using all gadgets from the same design, and the VFP is more advanced. We don't know yet when it comes to the gate complexity, but it's more advanced. It can have multiple PEs. So ultimately, actually, the gate count for the same number of engines will decrease because we have only one VFP for the whole system. Unlike there, we have 4, and so on.
Plus it's scalable because earlier it was a shared memory based thing. Now we have come up with a message passing scheme, so you can have more number of clusters and it is more scalable.
So I think that it's all good, but what we have to do is figure out, for example, with the platform that's being produced, can we that has only one big FPGA, but can we do some bit rate, some modulation which will fit into that? We have to sort of ask the reverse question.
With the existing one.
Platform, what can I put in it? And I think we should put something.
Are you using the same board? Are you using the same board that before for Genie platform? Or is it
Right now it's the
manufacturing?
LX50, but even thinking of SX95.
That's a
Even
great-
that, I don't think it's going to fit this architecture. It's gonna be-
Yeah, but this architecture is a matter of speed also, right? So if you decide what speed you want to run it
As
at.
it is right now, this has become MP7 multiprocessor architecture. It's going to be hard to fit in FPGA unless you go to multiple.
Multiple FPGA.
It's going to be hard because, in fact, we should go for ASIC if it's correct. That's what we target.
But it's
kind of
already-
model.
That's fine, but ASIC is going to cost you 20 million, so before that you have to convince somebody that you have something working, and for a thesis it's fine, you can do different kinds of simulation, but somehow one of the challenges of an engineer is to find a path which leads to a viable proof of concept.
Right, I mean, it's feasible. It's just a matter of
Some subset, whatever makes
Right.
sense, but we ought to identify a subset that can run in real time on an existing platform, and we have a state-of-the-art platform. So
Well, before, she has 3 additional blocks, which were not there. That, how full was the lost FPGA?
about 60, 70. That's only for transmitter
Right,
and the receiver also. So 2 FPGA for.
but FPGAs are getting doubling.
Yes,
every 2
right.
years.
But again, it's all about resource, how much resource we can provide.
Well, that's not the highest FPGA
No,
anyway.
it's not, it's one of the low end.
I don't agree with that, but I don't think it's all about resources. I think there's enough resources in this room in terms of human and brain power. We have all the labs,
Yes,
so it's a
yes.
question of deciding if you want something badly enough, you have to come up with a strategy and make it happen. As engineers collectively.
If you want to build a prototype, then you need to have better hardware.
But
But these boards are available on the shelf. This is directly pre-targeted to FPGA.
Yeah.
And if we want to restrict ourselves to 15:1, I'm quite confident that we can do it with
If we
2
do it, again, educationally, I'm saying that,
I mean,
forget what I want, but you go to a company, you work as a hardware engineer, all of you will be doing that. You have to come up with a strategy through which you can convince your financiers, your CEO, whoever, that this particular version of MIMO will work or whatever it is you're working. So you have to have a strategy. You can't just say, okay, we need 20 million. After that, we'll show you. They won't give you that 20 million. And your project will be killed. So you have to have a creative strategy for showing the best possible proof of concept. And in some case, maybe the best possible proof of concept has a supercomputer in the group somewhere. So you can say, okay, I put a supercomputer here to replace that piece of processing, but you need to have a strategy.
So this is very targetable to FPGA.
I think so.
Plus, if you build this PCI Express interface for VFP messaging, we can play it across multiple FPGA components. And once he finishes the Transilica work, which he's already done for the interleaver, he's now doing it for MIMA. So that's also targetable for FPGA.
So Madura, this means another 6 months.
No, but you know, I do really believe that it's not always about more resources. I can tell you about 5 projects I've been involved in where as the resources increase, the productivity decreases. I mean, this is a well-known phenomenon in the world.
So we need better if you want to fit it one.
Yes, that's okay. I mean, you can buy a printer.
And that's what I mean about more resources. It's not about more people.
Yes.
It's better.
But resources definitely means people money, not platform. Platform, yes, you can get you a faster, bigger platform.
This is the graph that we got for 24 Mbps, running 2 flows of 24 Mbps each. This is the throughput, peak throughput, which we got after measuring at the header for each target rate.
So it looks like here also you don't have any queuing because you're getting pretty flat.
But
this is
here,
at 200
yeah, this
milliamps.
is at 200.
This is at 200 milliamps.
Okay, oh, you had to up
Yeah.
the speed. The previous one was 100.
No, the multiple flows are run at 200 megahertz. The single flow is at 100. So we created a virtual platform with a new VSP controller and a mix of hardware and dummy hardware engines. We used it for performance evaluation and to analyze the available processing time. Also, we programmed the platform for 802.118 transmitter. In performance evaluation, we saw that the smaller the chunk size that we have lesser latency, and we are also able to meet the throughput requirements in case of both a single as well as multiple TFO. The future work, the task at IIFT is it still works on small number of chunks. Instead of making it as instead of it working as on chunks, we can do the dechunking. That is, the IFFT will start processing only after all the data chunks have arrived. It will form it back into one entire frame and then work on it. Also, we can replace the FIFO with a memory to reduce those empty and overflow errors that we get. The preamble task, which I said was getting triggered from the header and going to the IFFT, can then be self-generated within the IFFT itself. Also, we need to analyze the overhead which is introduced by the VFP controller when we are doing single flow versus multiple flows. That will be something which Omkar will be doing as his thesis. And then to integrate the data plane processor, which is Tensilica, into the virtual platform, and this will be Mohit's work. He's already done it with the interleaver. He's also doing it for the MIMO, so that we can get the accurate gate count and complexity analysis. Thank you.